Ringu.
Hello, thank you for joining me at Bert's Books, where this time we are going to be harking back to the time in which technology such as this ruled supreme. We are going to be examining Koji Suzuki's source novel for Hideo Nakata's highly successful 1998 horror film Ring. Nakata's film stands as one of those defining horror genre landmarks and was instrumental in opening up to Western audiences a rich seam of contemporary Japanese horror. The Ring franchise was already well established with Japanese audiences by the time of the film's first appearance in 1998. It had already existed as a television production which was broadcast around 1995. Suzuki's original novel had been published in 1991. The Ring novel wasn't published in English until around 2003, which was some years after the film's first appearance for English-speaking audiences. So for English audiences, the film will be a far more familiar proposition than the novel. At close to 400 pages, Suzuki's novel is evidently a heftier chunk than the film, which runs to 95 minutes. However, it's some credit to the author's pacing and storytelling prowess that this is not a laborious read. You can zip through this book without ever feeling you're having to work for it. But nonetheless, Suzuki's work does contain various layers of complexity which were stripped away from the cinematic content. We open in Yokohama. It's September 1990 in a nondescript housing development in which college girl Tomoko, who's been idling throughout the summer, is home alone. She's struggling to get some revision done, firstly against the late summer heat and secondly against a mounting sense of unease that swiftly transforms into absolute terror. Just as she turns to try and confront her sense of dread, we cut away to the intersection at the front of Shinagawa Station, where Kimura the cabbie has just drawn up in hope of a fare. Instead, he witnesses the abrupt and mysterious collapse of a young motorcyclist who's just pulled up between Kimura and the curb. Realising that the young man is dead, Kimura is haunted by the unnatural posture and the look of absolute dread in the biker's eyes. Sometime later, Kimura lands a fare, which causes him to pass this location again, and feeling the need to unburden, he narrates the story of the biker's demise to his passenger, who turns out to be the investigative journalist Kazuyuki Asakawa, who realises this incident must have coincided exactly with the mysterious sudden death of his niece Tomoko, and he finds his interest is piqued. Asakawa has trouble selling this story to his editor at the Daily News, but privately he can't leave the matter alone and heads for the archives to see if he can trace a connection between these deaths. Sure enough, a report shows a young couple, both college kids, dying of unnatural causes in a car at the exact same time and date. Convinced now that he's onto something, Asakawa seeks out his friend Yoshino, who'd written the article. He'd witnessed the death scene himself, and both the deceased had the appearance of being scared out of their wits. Yoshino gets the sense that Asakawa is onto a scoop of some kind, and he commits his friend to keeping him informed on anything further on this case. Summer turns to autumn and Asakawa keeps on digging. It's clear the four victims would have all known each other, and Asakawa is beginning to suspect some mystery virus. One Sunday he and his wife, together with their daughter Yoko, go to visit his wife's sister, giving him the chance to examine the site on which Tomoko had died. He uncovers a membership card under the name of Noniyama to a Pacific Resorts Club. It transpires that it's a residential leisure facility, a villa log cabin somewhere in South Hakone, which sounds like the likeliest location if his niece and friends had made use of this card for a brief vacation. Asakawa traces the mysterious Noniyama, and it turns out that he had lent the card to Iwata for a night away with it that he'd planned with his girlfriend for late August. Asakawa decides on a visit to this villa log cabin to see what else he can unearth. His bureau have already uncovered details of the guest register, which confirms the presence of the four students on the night of the 29th of August, and he's booked a night into the same room. Already, though, Asakawa is starting to have doubts about what he's getting himself into, and he decides he's going to need a sympathetic accomplice for this task, the most likely candidate being an idiosyncratic mate of his. Entering the Pacific Land office, the booking clerk offers him the loan of a video cassette. None of the titles on offer grab him. Once he's in the room, he notices a notebook has been left out, and it pops open to an entry for August the 30th, which states, "You'd better not see it unless you've got the guts. You'll be sorry that you did." Asakawa figures that this must refer to a VHS tape, and he's puzzled why the writer didn't just recommend whichever horror film had spooked them. He returns to the office, where an examination of the horror films reveal nothing out of the ordinary, but then he twigs that there's an unlabelled cassette on the shelf, with its erasure tabs punched, and the clerk tells him this has been kicking around in one of the rooms. He's no problem with Asakawa borrowing it, on the understanding that he'll return it. What harm can it do, thinks Asakawa, and as he rewinds and hits play, the room's former occupants' words of warning scrolling through his mind as the screen fills with black. Yes, the contents are creepy. Opening with the words, "Watch until the end," followed closely by, "You will be eaten by the lost." A jarring montage of unsettling, incomprehensible imagery unfolds, and as the kanji for Sada appears, Asakawa finds himself feeling downright weird. The sequence climaxes with an unspeakably violent sequence involving the face of a hateful male assailant before descending into subterranean darkness, and then the closing caption appears. Those who have viewed these images are fated to die at this exact hour 1 week from now. If you do not wish to die, you must follow these instructions exactly. But the rest has been erased. The tape reverting instead to the mundane imagery of a commercial. The phone rings. Asakawa picks it up to be told, "You've seen it now. Do like it says, or else." By now, utterly freaked out, he grabs the tape and flees the scene. Sometime later, he's hooked up, as his instincts instructed him to, with his idiosyncratic mate, the philosophy professor Ryuji Takayama, who's up for watching the video himself, being the kind of guy who'd book front row seats for the end of the world. To reinforce this point, he informs his friend that he's done another one last night. Many men retain in their social circle the kind of mate who their partner disapproves of them knocking around with. Asakawa's dodgy mate Ryuji, his particular quirk, brace yourselves, is rape. Yes, I was a bit unprepared for that as well. Last night's victim is the third that he's admitted to. Asakawa has kept stum about this for all the time that he's known Ryuji, and he still maintains a friendship with the guy, although he does at least ask himself why. Yeah, you won't remember this element from the film. I will just say at this point, more on this later. Rationalising that Ryuji is the only person who could watch this thing and not bat an eye, Asakawa agrees to a viewing, and he runs off a copy at home, where it's past bedtime for Yoko and his wife Shizu, who naturally can't stand Ryuji. The professor is naturally unfazed at the viewing, and immediately begins to review the conundrum from a deductive viewpoint. Analysing the video's content, it's clear that footage of a volcanic eruption must be specific and identifiable, as must the dialect of the woman who's speaking on the tape. Ryuji seems invigorated by this whole thing, but he mentions that there's a sense of malevolence about this tape, comparable to the sensations that he's experienced when carrying out his habitual crimes. Somewhere there's this vortex of evil energy. It makes me feel nostalgic. Asakawa goes back into work and confronts his boss with what he's learnt so far, and browbeats him into relieving him of his current assignment duties so that he can pursue this. He quickly identifies the volcano as Mount Mihara, which is on Izo-Oshima Island, and then chases up the former users of Cabin B4 by telephone, and establishes that the Kaneko family had arrived with a tape which had inadvertently been left taping and forgotten about on the night of the 26th of August, and was subsequently discovered by the 4 students, who, thinking it a prank, had erased the get-out clause at the end. Asakawa concludes that the airwaves had been hijacked in the area on that particular night, and resolves to investigate this, but this turns up a blank, the conclusion being that the machine had been tuned to an empty channel on the night in question. Trying to reach Ryuji that night, he's answered by a mysterious female voice, and he doesn't get hold of the professor till the following morning. It transpires that he's been correct on the volcano's location, as an ethnologist has confirmed the old woman's dialect ties it into this locality. The old lady's dialogue is a warning that, if you play in water, monsters are bound to get you. As the two puzzle over this, the door opens, and Asakawa is confronted with the lady from the night before. one of the professor's students, although there's presumably more to their relationship than that. Her name is Mai Takane. She's breathtakingly beautiful and seems a pretty unlikely companion for the seedy Ryuji. Back at home, Asakawa opts to review a sequence of the film which Ryuji had been particularly focused on, and he notices when he picks the cassette up that it's not been rewound. He realises that his wife has played it, and that furthermore she's done it with Yoko in her lap. The clock is now ticking on the whole family. He informs a sympathetic Ryuji, who shows him a breakdown of the tape by content, and he's deduced from the incidences of complete blackness, comparable to the organic blinking of the human eye, that these images haven't been captured and transferred mechanically, but organically and then psychically. The inference being that force of will on the part of the originator might mean that they actually require some action on the part of the viewer. Their next stop is the Memorial Institute of one of Japan's leading psychic investigators, where they examine the records for any likely candidates from Izo Oshima. One name in particular jumps out from the archives, a Sadako Yamamura, whose results in a 1958 test at the age of 10 showed a psychic projection onto film of the kanji character for mountain, identical to a shot in the video. Not forgetting that the name Sada shows up in the film too. Ignoring the gale conditions that are gathering off the coastline, the pair hightail it to Oshima Island. On the island, the local correspondent for Asakawa's employer greets them. He's already tracked down the Yamamura family, though he doesn't think Sadako is around anymore. Asakawa gleans that Sadako Yamamura, born in 1947, was the daughter of Shizuko Yamamura and possibly her lover, psychiatry professor Hayachiiro Ikuma. The mother and daughter disappeared from the locality around 1950, but Shizuko had aroused some media notoriety before returning to the island around 1956, looking a worse for wear, and shortly after she threw herself into the volcano, leaving her daughter to be brought up by family. The following year, the girl predicts the eruption of this volcano, and is proved correct to the time and date. The reputation she gains from this causes her to blip the professor's radar at a research institute on the mainland. However, she disappears from the island, joining a theatre group, and at that point, contact with her family ceases. Asakawa calls in Yoshino's help on the mainland in finding out more detail about the mysterious Sadako and her family background. Yoshino tracks down the theatre company, and the director bids Shin, one of the veteran actors, to talk to the journalist about what memories he can dredge up on that creepy girl. What was so strange about her? She was always alone, and to describe her in a word, Shin opts for eerie. Shin had seen with his own eyes one night an incident in which she'd been alone in a darkened room late in the evening with a flickering television on, nothing on the screen. He realises that the TV isn't even plugged in. The theatre company's founder, Mr. Shigemori, had been fascinated by this story, and also it seems he had a bit of a thing for Sadako and had ambitions there. He drunkenly babbles about going over to her place and acting upon this, and when they see him the next morning, he's an ashen shadow of himself, dying, heart failure, right there in his seat. The next day she has quit, and nobody's sure what has happened to her after that. A look through the archive files unveils a photo that reveals Sadako to have been strikingly beautiful. Yoshino faxes his findings, including Sadako's picture, to the island's bureau, where Asakawa and Ryuji are contemplating the impending hurricane. Hayatsu suggests that they meet one of Shizu Yamamura's childhood friends, the 68-year-old Genji, who's happy to reminisce, grabbing their attention with the story of a transformative incident in Shizu's life when she retrieves a local mystical icon, the statue of Enno Azuno, from the sea after it's chucked there by some GIs. She accomplishes this at night, swimming down from Genji's boat, and the incident seems to have been pivotal in her attaining her psychic powers. experiencing visions that later become reality, events which push her fatefully towards contact with Professor Ikuma, who she seems to have laid blame with for her eventual sad fate. Yoshino has unearthed further details on this. Shizu came into the care of Ikuma around 1947, and her apparent psychic abilities aroused great interest in the professor, who involved Shizu in his own studies, as well as an extramarital love affair through which she becomes pregnant. In the early part of the 1950s, their psychic research together begins to arouse public interest, and Shizu's powers start to gain her some reputation, until a live before the press demonstration goes badly wrong, and the public backlash turns savage. This humiliation is enough to send Shizu on her downward spiral, and to have provoked a white-hot anger against the public on the part of Sadako, whose own powers are evidently further evolved than her mother's. These events would explain at least some of the imagery that appears on the tape, which is starting to look like a psychic flashback of the most extreme emotional events in Sadako's life. This is all good background stuff, but what has happened to Sadako? With time rapidly running down, Asakawa and Ryuji elect to trace her backwards from the Hakone location. Another piece of Yoshima's research is faxed through. The site had previously been a tuberculosis sanatorium, which had diversified its services somewhat, but closing its doors in 1972. And one of the few traceable operatives there is one Dr. Nagao, who towards the end of the establishment's run had transformed from doctor to patient, having carelessly contracted smallpox from another resident. Significantly, he's the last recorded smallpox victim in Japan. Tracking Nagao down to his current practice, they immediately recognise him as the sinister man in the final sequence of the video, and they aggressively confront him over his dealings with Sadako. The terrified doctor, bewildered how these two could know so much about this, breaks down and confesses that during his smallpox infection he'd noticed her in the sanatorium garden where he'd been visiting her father, and had, on some malign impulse, responded to the girl's strange beauty by sexually assaulting her. In the aftermath of this, the doctor suddenly realises that Sadako is not quite what he'd assumed her to be. She is a pseudo-hermaphrodite with testicular feminisation syndrome. Diagram below. Nagao's reaction to this is the overwhelming urge to kill her, his instinct telling him she'll kill him if he doesn't do the same to her. Not even checking if she's still breathing, he disposes of her body in a nearby well, a well which would now be on the location occupied by the villa log cabin. And from here we're into the story's climactic spin. With less than a day on the clock for Asakawa and 2 for Ryuji, they head back to Hakone, frantically seek the location of the well. Surely Sadako would require them to retrieve her remains and to put them to rest, and then everybody would safely be out of the woods. Well, you probably know how this goes from the film. Similar deal to the book, there's a cruel twist to the plot just when we're assuming that Sadako's spirit has been placated. One significant difference is that the book makes far more of the viral aspect of Sadako's curse, as if her attacker's smallpox virus has somehow fused and mutated with her own psychic malice. The plot theme that leads us to the story's original sequel, Spiral, the first few chapters of which are included as a postscript here. The film of which was produced more or less concurrently with Hideo Nakata's Ringu, but it wasn't pushed in the UK as such, and Ring 2 became the official sequel here. There's an extra weird twist to the book regarding Ryuji's character, of whom we find out very late in the narrative that maybe he's not the person that we've pictured him to be. In the words of the student whom we encountered earlier in the story, he had deliberately played the scoundrel with Asakawa, but he revealed a very different side to himself, an almost virginal one when he was with her. This raises certain questions regarding Asakawa's dodgy mate, why he would encourage his friend to believe that he's a rapist, and why Asakawa has maintained their friendship believing that story. That's Koji Suzuki's Ring then. Very recognisable to anybody familiar with the film, but the novel's narrative does pack a few more dimensions to it and a few more jarring surprises. Both the book and the film carry a strong sense of demonic forces, which are intrinsic elements to Japanese culture, lurking not far beneath the surface of an apparently ordered, well-run and efficient society. It did occur to me, not having visited the film or the book for some years, that technological change might have rendered the premise somewhat obsolete, but it's still a powerfully disturbing concept, locking in with a sense of technological anxiety and the ever-enticing bugbear of urban myth. Incidentally, it's always reminded me of a tale I was told back in college years of a late night in someone's digs in which the residents were awake at night when the telly had gone off to static, only to observe the image of a handheld ace of spades inexplicably appear from the haze and rotate. These things appear to be universal, but Ring has retained its reputation as a highly significant entry to the horror genre, as well as an enduring flagship for Eastern horror cinema, and its themes being echoed in more recent works such as NBC's Channel Zero series. Koji Suzuki has enjoyed continued success with further novels in the Ring series and Dark Water, which was also brought to the screen by Hideo Nakata. So keep watching those empty channels, but you may not want to bother with the Hollywood remakes. Hello? Who? Oh, it's you. Oh, that's funny. I was just watching. Yeah. Oh, that's weird. Yeah. So you get what? What, a week? A week? Oh. Okay. Well, that's what, Thursday? It's got to be Thursday. Couldn't do front. No. Okay, Thursday. All right. Well, it's a bit of an echo. Bit of an echo there. You're down a well. It sounds like you're down a well or something. Yeah. Oh. Well. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. All right. If that's how it's got to be. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. See you Thursday. Yeah. Okay. See you. Sayonara. Bye.